Hey, what's up, everyone? Jared Stanley here with our pre-opening day Q&A. I want to thank everyone for all their questions. So we're going to get going. The first one's from Justin, wanting to know, why won't the brass spend money to put a competitive product on the field? I think this is a question and a sentiment shared by a lot of people. So the collective bargaining agreement in baseball is such that it doesn't incentivize teams in the Rangers position rebuilding to spend money on guys, especially early in their rebuild. As a matter of fact, it doesn't just not incentivize them, it decentivizes it. Because here's the deal. You got 6 years, 6 to 7 years, essentially, from the time you come up to reach free agency. Not everyone makes their debut and sticks as a big leaguer at 20, 21, 22, 23 years old. Most guys, it's 24, 25, even later. So a lot of free agents are 30, 31, 32 when they reach free agency. For instance, Trevor Story is going to be 30 when he reaches free agency. And this is a really good player, a first-round pick, a guy that moved, relatively quickly. But, the reality is, guys, unlike in the NBA where you get drafted and you hit the NBA top level, you don't necessarily need to go through the G League. In Major League Baseball, you go through the minors. And so, let's take George Springer. He was a big free agent this offseason. What incentive did the Rangers have to sign George Springer? He's 30, 31 years old. By the time the Rangers reach their target of really competing and fielding a team that's going to fight for a playoff spot, George Springer is probably out of his prime. And now you're paying him for a production that he's no longer going to give you, at least at the level of the money. And when he was giving you that production, you didn't really need it, if that makes sense. So the Rangers only have 30 some odd $30 million committed to players after this year. There's a reason for that. It's not because they're going to become Oakland or Pittsburgh. It's because they're getting ready to spend a lot of money because they're going to be 1 year closer to reaching that kind of target re-arrival date, if that makes sense. You want to time up as best as you can the money spent and the production from the players in whom you invest with, your years of really competing. That's why it makes sense for the really good teams to spend money. And it feels like a rich get richer standpoint because it makes sense for them to spend. It makes sense for a team trying to win a World Series right now to pay buku bucks for a guy who's probably going to produce nowhere near the level of the money 3 years from now, but you're not really concerned about 3 years from now. You're concerned about now. Well, it's the opposite for the Rangers. They're not as much concerned about now as they are 3 years from now. And so the current system does not really incentivize them to spend money. They need to get 1 year closer, feel like they're making progress. And I think this offseason, they're going to start spending a lot of money. All right, this from Subcheck on Reddit. With Odor's time with the Rangers over, Chris Davis and Kyle Gibson become the highest paid players on the roster. It looks like the Rangers should be poised to spend money in the coming years. Who do you see as the next internal player to be signed to an extension? Could it be a viable strategy to try to lock someone like Josh Young up before he plays a major league game? We are seeing more and more teams take on that strategy. They're not spending a lot of money for a guy like Josh Young, but they're buying out the arbitration years. And the hope is that 6 years from now, he's producing, or even really when he hits arbitration, he's producing at a level that's much higher than the money you've committed to him. I think it's something the Rangers could explore, but I wouldn't see it be anything more than like a 6 year for like $15 million deal, kind of like what they did more or less with Jose Leclerc. But I don't know that that's something they would do with Josh Young. As far as internal extension guys, I think they'll, and people have asked, and we're going to get into Joey Gallo here in a little bit. I think you can consider Joey Gallo as a candidate. There are reasons why I don't think that's going to happen. Maybe someone like Mike Foltynewicz pitches well, and in the middle of the year, they want to lock him up for a few more years, but that's not going to be a big dollar extension. That might be, hey, we're going to keep Mike Foltynewicz around for 2 more years at $10 million a year, 20 total. Other than that, position player wise, I don't really see anyone who is in that kind of target time frame where an extension is needed. Maybe a David Dahl, but even, you have control over him for a couple more years in which you don't need to overreact to that. So I don't see any of these big extensions taking place here this year. We'll get more into Joey Gallo here in a little bit. From King Stratton, who do you think is the best case scenario for the tandem spots in the rotation? Or what do you think is the best case scenario? Are there 2 or 3 guys you anticipate doing well? And on that note, do you see any of these guys proving themselves and getting a full rotation spot this season, or does the worry about innings count prevent that? So I'll start back to front. Yeah, I think no matter how Taylor Hearn, Dane Dunning, Kyle Cody, those guys pitch, because of recent injuries and just lack of buildup because of the abbreviated 2020 season, I don't think they're ever really going to consistently get opportunities this year to go 6-7 innings like a normal starter. I think that obviously the hope is that they pitch in such a way that going into this offseason, the hope is that, they could earn those roles next year. I'm really curious about Dane Dunning. I'm intrigued by how he could operate in a 3-4 inning stretch. I think he's got a really good chance. And then this isn't really as much someone for the future, but I do think Jordan Lyles has looked different. And that's the key. Good results in the spring, but looking more or less the same don't do anything to me. Looking different tells me maybe you've made adjustments. And I think that's been the case for Jordan Lyles. All right, this one from Gavin. We talk about the stadium, but don't hear much chatter about the turf. How do the players like it? So far, the early returns are fine. I think the players feel like it's, not a surface in which their body is totally breaking down on them, like, some of these old surfaces. I think they feel like the reads off the turf are true. So they're not dealing with as many bad hops. Of course, sometimes you get a little, notch in the carpet that tricks it up, but that doesn't really happen from like a read standpoint as far as like side to side. The ball kind of goes at you. One thing early in the season last year, people felt like the turf played fast. So it was more conducive to ground balls. Ground balls were getting through. It was making it tougher on infielders because it would take some strong hops. We didn't see that as much as the year went on. But from like a physical standpoint, I think we need to see a full year to really get fair returns from those guys, but they didn't seem to voice any sort of displeasure with it. From Robert, lots of areas of concern this year. I'm most fearful of the rotation. If the wheels fall off, not only do we lose, but no sense of being in games before they start. Give me best case realistic rotation we can hope for this year. I don't think anyone's going to look at this rotation and say this is a dominant group. I think you just hope that the young pitchers are able to deliver in a way that they are competitive. I don't necessarily know, like, best case realistic, if this is the answer you're looking for. I just think being competitive and not doing what you sort of alluded to in the question, where you just every day you've got a guy you feel like you got to score 8 runs for it to even win the game. I think having the returning guys, Gibson and Lyles, be just a little bit better. Having Mike Foltynewicz be a league average pitcher, and then you get what you get out of the young guys, and then Kohei Arihara. I just think that's those are fair upside expectations. I think Kohei Arihara could be really good. I think Mike Foltynewicz could return to form. I think Kyle Gibson is going to be a lot better this year. But for me to sit here and say, well, all these things are going to happen, just probably isn't realistic. That's the case in any team with any group of players. Some are going to outperform, others are going to underperform, and then others will kind of meet expectations. So I think that this can be a competitive rotation, in terms of kind of being middle of the pack. That's what I think upside is. Here's another question from U6, and it's a weird Twitter thing. Who's the last member of the 26-man roster? Well, I think we're going to find that out tomorrow. My guess is Colby Allard. He's optionable. He's a lefty, which I think might help with this current group, and he can go multiple innings. He's also on the 40-man roster already. So no roster manipulation. You're not exercising an option that you don't want to exercise. You already have exercised it. He is optionable, so I go with Colby Allard. From Nike, should opening day be a national holiday? Yes, I think so. Which Ranger gets called up from the minors first? My guess is it's a position player, so I'd go with Andy Banez. And where do I think Rugi will end up? I think he ends up on a bad team, because I think it's a bad team that can take a chance on Rugi and give him a year to see if he can figure things out. So I don't know if that's the Tigers or the Orioles, but one of those teams would seem to make sense. From Rom, assuming IKF is once again stellar defensively, what does he have to do offensively to stay at shortstop for 22 and beyond? Or do you think the Rangers will pursue a free agent regardless? And for a bonus, if they do pursue the shortstops, which of the 5 do you pull out all the stops to sign? So I think if you look at the shortstops in Major League Baseball right now, we're talking about maybe the best offensive grouping in the league. And it's just not realistic or fair to expect Isaiah Kiner-Falefa to jump from someone who's never had a 700 OPS to someone who's going to push a 900 OPS. That's just not his game. That's not his strength. That's not necessarily his fault. I think that Isaiah Kiner-Falefa has a place on this team, absolutely. And I'm excited to see what sort of improvements he's made offensively. But for him to perform in such a way that all of a sudden you're going to turn your back on Seager, Lindor, Story, these guys, it's just not likely. Who do I pull out the stops to sign? Francisco Lindor to me is maybe the best of the group. Corey Seager and Trevor Story are the ones who I believe are most realistic, and they present, an interesting kind of comparison. Corey Seager's younger and the better hitter. But he might not be a shortstop long-term. I mean, he's really kind of just an average shortstop now. Trevor Story is a really good defensive shortstop. He's also faster, doesn't have the injury history. But how much has Coors Field inflated his offense? I don't know. I mean, you can look at the home road splits, but a lot of guys have, better home versus road splits. What would he do in a full season with the Rangers? If offense is your priority, Corey Seager's the better offensive player. If you're looking more full package, I think Trevor Story is the better option. The wild card here is Carlos Correa. We really haven't heard a whole lot about Carlos Correa. And the interesting thing is, if you look at the really, really good teams in baseball right now and the teams who typically spend, they don't really need shortstops. So either, my guess is one of these guys is going to get signed by a team who's got a shortstop in place and someone's going to move, say the Red Sox, and they move Xander Bogaerts. You're going to see maybe a guy sort of slip through the cracks and end up with a team you wouldn't necessarily expect because that team's really willing to spend a lot and they're not getting the offers from the franchises that they're looking for. But I think as far as the Rangers are concerned, I think it's Seager or Story. And I go back and forth each day, which one I'm maybe more bullish on signing here and being here long-term. From Any Permission 1124, over the course of a 162-game season where expectations are not necessarily high in the win column, what kinds of things do you watch to keep it interesting and optimistic about the future? It's the young guys. I mean, from a general standpoint, just the trends of the game for that particular year, the numbers, what stories the numbers tell from like a general standpoint. Because good team, medium team, bad team, numbers are still there telling a story, and they sometimes tell really interesting stories. But I think for me, Rangers specific, it's just the progress of the young guys. And it's not about looking at a particular young guy at the end of the year and looking at their season numbers. It's about taking a young guy and seeing, okay, he pulverized fastballs in April. He stopped seeing as many fastballs in May and June, was struggling against the off-speed stuff. And then in July and August and September actually started showing improvement in those areas, watching the growth and the adjustments that are made by the players. Those are the things that I really look out for. From Wired Sheep, what are the 3 things not being discussed about the team that I should be optimistic about heading into this season? I think, a lot of people are talking about the young guys. I mean, to me, I'm excited about, I'll give you players like David Dahl. I don't know that people are talking about him a ton. And Kohei Arihara, surprisingly, people aren't talking about him a ton either. You can dial it up to 94, 95. I think he's a really interesting guy who might have been undervalued when he, came over from Japan. And I think one thing I don't know. I think in an ideal world with the way the game's being played now, you don't want to have to rely on stolen bases to generate offense. I think if you just reality look at this Rangers team, they're going to run a lot, and they've got a lot of athleticism in the outfield defensively. I think those elements are going to be really fun to watch throughout the year. From Squitchy, Have you gotten to try the food at the stadium? And if so, what's the best? I have not. I did walk the concourse. I will tell you that I think some of the options are maybe a little more limited in this year than, subsequent years because of COVID. But, I think, let's see there. I know there's Pluckers out there. There's Golden Chick, for some restaurant concessions. They've got Truly. They've got like a Truly bar and lounge, which is awesome. Love Truly. And, I think they've got, all sorts of different, I think the Boomstick's back, but I have not been able to try any of it. All right. From Insanity, do you think the Rangers are going to have an injury problem? I've noticed a lot of those who we would like to start are injured. I don't pay attention to other teams. So is everyone having the same issues? Yeah, I think this is kind of a misconception. I think the numbers sort of show the Rangers are in the middle of the pack with this. But here's the difference is like, if you follow the Rangers, when AA Steve or AAA Joe gets hurt for a significant amount of time because, it's going to be out there on Twitter, but you don't necessarily know the same things for the Marlins or the Orioles or the Pirates. So it just seems like you consume a much greater volume of injuries for the Rangers than other teams. The reality is the Rangers are more or less middle of the pack with this, specifically when it comes to Tommy John stuff, because I know that's always a hot button issue. But that's a great question. From Azai, I've heard many say the Rangers farm system is thin on talent. What does the Rangers scouting department have for a plan of action to fix this? How much effort do the Ranger scouts take in looking for talent in the Caribbean, Japan, and South America? So the Rangers actually are regarded as a relatively deep farm system, but one without like a star, right? So you look at the Padres or the Mariners, these like the Twins with Royce Lewis, the Padres with Abrams and Campusano and all, they've got guys who are like, man, this guy is like a franchise player. The Rangers actually have like a depth of talent, but I think in industry wide, there's a sentiment that maybe they don't have that one franchise player. As far as, how much effort they take internationally, I mean, the Rangers have always been one of the more internationally driven organizations, whether it's the Pacific Rim operations, the Latin American operations, they've always had a really strong presence there, especially if you look at the rosters and the contributors over the last several years. From Jesu, since it might not be the year to go watch the Rangers hoping that they win, what are the coolest things you found in the new stadium? To be honest with you, I haven't really been able to take in like the stadium experience because, we've been limited in where we're allowed to go, with like the kind of bubble sort of setup. But what I'd say is I think the left field 3 decks seem like that could be a cool kind of viewpoint. Everything I've heard from fans, it seems like the seats, they're all closer to the action, which gives you kind of more of a feeling like you're right in it. And then I just think it's going to be a loud atmosphere, whether it's half full or sold out or whatever. It's built more up. It's more enclosed, especially when the roof is closed. I think it's going to be a really loud, fun atmosphere. From Twiddle Bits, what 3 things would make it a successful season regardless of the record? I think, generally speaking, it's development of young players. I think you want to find 2 to 3 guys who you believe for sure have shown you enough to lead you to say, this guy is going to be a starting or high level contributor on our next playoff teams. That's just fewer spots you have to try and fill to get to that point. So that's something I think is significant. And I think whatever moves the Rangers make, maximizing the value of the guys whom they trade, taking on more prospects is a big one. And then getting the guy they want at number 2. That's going to be a big one as well. And getting that guy going and, beginning the clock on that player's arrival at the big league level. Is Gallo a Ranger on September 1st? No, he's not. That's my thought. That goes to the question about extensions earlier. Scott Boras does not have his clients sign extensions. It very, very rarely happens. And when it does, you have to go so over the top to pay them to justify them not reaching free agency. With Joey Gallo having 2 years left on his deal, and at that point, 1.5 years, that's probably the way to maximize his, his value. You don't want to wait until there's just a couple months. And my guess is that, unfortunately, Joey Gallo's value to the Rangers might be better in a trade than it is in a Rangers uniform. When does Young come up to play third? You're probably looking at July with his injuries, my guess. Which starting pitcher has the best win-loss record in ERA? I'll go with Kohei Arihara for ERA, Kyle Gibson for win-loss. Does IKF win a Gold Glove at short? I don't think so. Which young player emerges as an up-and-coming star? I hope it's Leody Taveras. That would be a really good thing for the Rangers. I've known it all. What realistic expectations do you have for the season from the team, the players, and the coaching staff to compete? I don't really know the best way to answer that, like from a coaching staff standpoint. I do think that they're going to be experimental, not like totally wacky scientist, way, but I think they're going to use this year to try and implement certain strategies and to see whether or not they work. And I think, for the team, it's going to be up and down because they got a lot of young players. And so there's going to be some stretches where, you look into the future and you say, I see it. And then there are going to be stretches you're like, huh? That's just kind of natural for a young team. From Edgar, how are the Rangers not going for the number 1 pick for next year's draft? Well, I don't know what leads you to believe that they're not in a position to earn that. They will likely be in the conversation. And the other thing is, the dynamic of that in baseball compared to other sports is much different because in the NFL, you get the number 1 pick. He's playing for you week 1 of that next season. In the NBA, you get the number 1 pick. That guy's likely a starting player for you that next season. Let's say the Rangers were to draft Jordan Lawler, the high school kid from Jesuit, the shortstop. He's probably not a Ranger on an everyday basis until 2025. So that's why a lot of teams don't operate in that fashion. Lance, how should the Rangers measure success this year? I think it's just the growth and development of young players and what I said earlier, finding guys who are going to be a part of the future. Brew Boy, will they be above 500 in the end? My guess is no. I don't think that's really the emphasis this year or goal that they've necessarily set. Craig kind of has the same question, so that's the answer. Aaron, is Jack Leiter number 2 a possibility? Yes, but he needs to stop throwing no-hitters. Otherwise, he's going to leapfrog Kumar Rocker probably in the rankings and the thoughts there. From G Hubs, what's the feeling in the locker room without Elvis and Odor now? Are there too many new players to notice a difference? We're not in there every day because of COVID, but what I'll tell you, and speaking of players, it feels like it's a new chapter. And not as much because of Rugi. Rugi didn't have that stronghold on the clubhouse, and it's not a shot at Elvis at all. But the reality is this organization's going in a different direction. They're going younger, and I think they want these younger players to take ownership of kind of the leadership element of this. And, without the old guard or guys who were around for the last playoff teams, it kind of gives the young guys a little more opportunity to take ownership. Scott, what's Kyle Gibson's floor and ceiling ERA for this season? Can he be an all-star? Well, the Rangers have to have one all-star, remember. I think it's likely Joey Gallo. I do think Kyle Gibson's going to have a lot better year. I think, he's a smart pitcher and was able to use last year as a kind of a measuring stick and work off of that. He's added a cutter that he will, help kind of take hitters off of his sinker. And I just think physically he's in a much better place after dealing with ulcerative colitis. He's another year removed. I think his body's a lot stronger. So I think, with Kyle Gibson, you're looking at a guy that could have an ERA. Again, it seems like Globe Life Field is going to be maybe somewhat pitcher friendly. I think we might be getting into that in a little bit. But I think, you're looking at a guy who can have an ERA a little bit above 3. But again, you could have a guy with an ERA around 5. I think it's unfair for me to at least not present that part of it with what he did last year. From Ethan, will the Rangers get dominated by left-handed pitching this year? I think you got to look at it relative to how they do versus right-handed pitching. I think this is a Rangers offense that isn't going to be near the top of the charts in a lot of categories. So that probably means they're not going to be near the top against lefties or righties. But I think that relative to how they fare against righties, I do think this is a lineup that can have success against lefties or maybe position too, because you've got even the lefties, Gallo, and when Calhoun's healthy, Nate Lowe. These are guys who appear to be able to have success against lefties. From Jordy, since the owners are not in win mode, what players might perform well to offload at the deadline and bring back above average prospects? I don't know what your definition of above average is. Joey Gallo is the guy who's the most valuable. Jonathan Hernandez and Joely Rodriguez have value. Obviously, Jonathan's is not really there right now because of the injury. And I don't know that the Rangers are necessarily gung-ho on moving him. If Mike Fultonevich comes back and has like an all-star season, then, he could be that guy. Kyle Gibson, same thing. He could be that guy. But I think really the one guy who I think will definitely bring back an above average prospect if by above average you mean a top 100 prospect, is Gallo. Kenneth, what percentage of the opening day roster is still here in September? Traded, released, sent down? Probably like 80. Well, okay. So if you don't include injuries, right? Because that's going to be a part of it, and whatnot. 75%. You're going to have guys traded. You're going to have a couple maybe released, sent down. I don't think that it's going to be. I think you're going to see throughout the year a lot of guys coming and going. So I guess maybe the better way for me to answer this is you're going to see a lot of different players in a Rangers uniform this year. Whether they come up for a week and go back down and then come up, you're going to see probably a few guys who have 5 or 6 different stints with the Rangers this year between being with the big league club and AAA. I think you're going to see a lot of that, especially on the mound. AK Sooners, who's leaving before the trade deadline this year? It's tough to know for sure. Anyone in the bullpen is always an option for a team that's not competing for a playoff spot. But I'd also say that Joey Gallo is definitely a guy who, will be on deadline or trade watch all year. So here's the question from JM Texas PR. Why would the Rangers trade Gallo rather than build around him? I answered, he asked about the owners not spending money. I answered that at the beginning. Again, with Gallo, he's likely not going to sign an extension, not because he doesn't want to be here, but because his agent's track record is such that extensions just don't happen. Scott Boras clients don't sign extensions before they've hit free agency for the first time. So now you run the risk of letting him hit free agency and him not coming back, when also, by the way, you could trade him. And if you want him and he wants to be here, you bring him back in free agency anyway. And the best way to maximize his value for the organization is to likely trade him. The Rangers, I think, would love to sign him to an extension. I don't get the sense that is going to be the case, though. Jeremiah asked a question about what are realistic scenarios we should shoot for from a rebuilding standpoint. Kind of mentioned that. It's the growth of the young players. Is it possible the Rangers end up having a top 5 pick next year? Absolutely. Will Gallo hit over 250? I'd say kind of the 235 to 245 range. Will Calhoun and Solak take next steps? I'm really intrigued to see what Nick Solak does this year. I think a lot of the numbers below the surface last year, beneath the surface, suggested he should have had more success than what he did. And I'm curious to see what the numbers look like over the full season. Sleeper prospect that gets caught up and makes an impact from Bryce. I'm going to go with Luis Ortiz, former first-round pick of the Rangers. Didn't really work out as a starter at the big league level or coming up through the minors with the Brewers and the Orioles after the Rangers traded him in the Lucroy deal. I think he's got a chance to be a really good back-end reliever. From Kobe, full platoon at third with Holt and Culberson. And John's got the same question. Or does one get the majority of the starts? I don't know that it's going to be a straight-up left-right platoon, but I think you're going to see both guys there. Is it 50-50? I don't know. Maybe a 60-40 type setup for whoever ends up hitting better. Gary wants to know, how do you feel about the catching situation? I really like it. I think both guys are really, really strong defensively, and that's important. I'm intrigued to see what sort of growth and development Jonah Heim can demonstrate offensively, because he's got the frame that makes you think, this is a guy who could be a good offensive player. He's a contact guy. And I think that over the course of 100 starts, Jose Trevino is a guy that can hit, 10 to 15 home runs. From Juicy, Rocker versus Leiter, who's fallen to Texas at number 2? I still think Rocker goes number 1 right now, but that's an ever-evolving discussion. From Mavs fan, I need a sales pitch on why I'm tuning in this year. I think, for me, again, it's going to be an exciting, fun brand. You're going to see a lot of running, a lot of action. I think you're probably going to see some kind of crazy-ish games. And then if you really love watching young players and kind of looking towards the future of this organization, you're going to get a lot of those opportunities. From Cockrell, in your opinion, which young players must the Rangers see develop this year to get this rebuild moving in the right direction? I'm going to say Leody Taveras is one. And then pick a pitcher, whether it's Dane Dunning or Kyle Cody or Wes Benjamin, Taylor Hearn. Just give me one. I think that would be important. But I'm going to go ahead and say that I think I'll just throw out Dunning and Taveras. From Eric, do you think the Rangers could have a potential playoff squad as early as 2023? Well, with expanded playoffs as a strong possibility, yes. I think they go and make a big signing this offseason, maybe another. If they don't, I think they're going to make 2 over the next 2 off seasons, whether they both come this upcoming off season or they spread them out. You're going to have the number 2 pick this year. And if you draft one of the pitchers, they're likely going to be a part of the mix by then. You've got the growth of these young players. You have more clarity on what holes you need to fill. So I do think at minimum, they're going to at least go into the season with us saying, hey, yeah, playoffs are a possibility. World Series by 2023. I don't know that, at this point it's on that kind of a path, but getting into the conversation. Yeah. If they have a good couple of off seasons, it's definitely possible. Does the staff have issues connecting with Latin players? This from Matt. Since Woody's been here, we've seen a decline in Latin free agents and decreased Latin starters. I heard on the broadcast that Gallo recruited Dawn. It got me thinking that maybe this is a Beltre thing. No, I don't think the Rangers have an issue with Latin American players. You look at their bullpen, there's a large Latin American presence. Obviously, Hernandez, Leclerc, and Rodriguez all hurt, but those are 3 impact players. You still have Ronald Guzman. Up until this offseason, you had Elvis and Rougned Odor. I don't think that Latin American presence, and if you go to the minor league system, I mean, they've got a ton of international flavor, and you look at their top prospects. So I don't see that as an issue. I think it's maybe just cyclical, if anything. KCL, and by the way, it's definitely not because Woody's ability to connect with Latin American players. KCL, I think a cornerstone pitcher is the same as finding your number 1 quarterback. If they can find one in this year's draft, it could speed up the process. If they don't, I could see this being a 5-year process. Your thoughts? I mean, listen, an ace of a staff is huge. Does it have the same sort of impact as a quarterback? Probably not apples to apples, but an ace of the staff is huge. And if you believe that you got one in Rocker or Leiter, then you got to take it. Now, how much does it expedite the process? I don't know, that it speeds it up by 2 years or a year, but it definitely does help get the process going, no doubt. From David, how concerning should it be that there's not a single person on this team that we can say will be a bona fide cornerstone for the franchise? Knee jerk is Gallo, but of course the trade rumors always seem to be there. Yeah, I mean, I think for any team rebuilding, you want to find those young guys you can build around. I think that's where the Rangers are kind of efforting towards. They're not there now, and they know that. The hope is that they do find those guys. From Logan, do you think the Rangers will talk about adjusting the fences if this proves to be a deep park again? Yes, I think it can be a conversation if the numbers over the course of a full season are slanted in that way. From Adam, this is a young team. Who will emerge as a team leader? I think Jose Trevino is definitely a leader. Isaiah Kiner-Falefa is definitely a leader. Joey is kind of a good lieutenant. And I think Kyle Gibson has taken a lot of leadership, ownership in on the pitching side of things. From Razorback fan 214, who are the guys looking to as the team captain? So kind of that same answer right there kind of applies. From John UJ, how many games before Fulte is released? I actually think Mike Foltynewicz is going to be, a league average, if not better pitcher this year. So I think he's with the Rangers all year. Joe, of the opening day 26-man roster, who do you think will be the first person sent out not for an injury? Either the first long reliever utilized or Colby Allard is my guess if he makes the roster as a 26-man. And then from A. Salas, what are your realistic expectations for the Rangers? Kind of answered that with the previous questions, but to give a little bit of a different spin, I think you're going to see, hopefully at some point you're going to look at a team and in the lineup, you're going to see Trevino, Tavares, Dahl, Solak, Huff, maybe even Tejeda. You're going to see a large youth presence with this team. And then last question here from Brolympia. What are the 3 defining moments of the JD era in your eyes, transaction-wise? Definitely the Teixeira trade has got to be one. The Beltre signing has got to be another. The Cliff Lee trade has got to be another. Those are the first 3 that stand out. There you go. A lot of questions. If you've stuck with it from start to finish, I appreciate it. I hope everyone's having a great day and take care.